I think, who was here that left?
Peter Wood.
Peter Wood was here.
Yeah, Scott and Peter are not seated in their queues. So let's wait for them. Here comes Scott.
I don't have Scott down here. Do you have Scott?
Yeah, Scott Bartleson is in. I thought I saw Peter Wood.
You did?
He did. She mentioned it.
Then you went out that door.
Thank you.
Oh, microphone's on.
Press the center button.
I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. First, I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping chores. Eric Hampton will not be a member of this committee, and we appreciate Eric. He's a member of the RDA with me. Curtis Eller will be replacing him. However, Curtis has the flu, so he couldn't come to this meeting. Next item, agenda number 2, is the acceptance of the minutes of last meeting. Has everybody read them? Any corrections? Comments? I'll entertain a motion from the floor, from the members. Second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Our next item on the agenda is to discuss the format for the public input. For this phase, I'd like to turn the microphone to our staff who are in front of us. I'll introduce them real quickly. They can introduce themselves. Karen Sportini with Economic Development. Sasmitha Atota, Mary Dean, and Pat Carlton. Okay. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So we discussed a couple of options for doing the public engagement part of this task force meetings. And I think based on our collective experience working on different projects, we feel like having a more informal roundtable discussion for residents to participate is a better option. So, yes. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. So, like I said, we would like to do, we proposed as one of the options. You may choose to alter these options based on the discussion here today. But what we think may be a good idea is to have at least 2 or 3 workshops in different parts of the town, all discussing the same content, but at different times and different places, so we can invite as many people as possible to these workshops. And the roundtable will be staffed by committee members and staff. For each table, we may have 1 or 2 committee members sit down along with a staff person. The committee members will be facilitating the discussion, and maybe we would invite the residents in the roundtable to be the scribe for this, to write down the meeting notes. And in order that we have an effective meeting, it'll be nice to have a facilitated discussion, so have some structured questions that we prepare as part of this next organizational meeting, or maybe today, if we have time. And then pass these questions around at various roundtables and see what audiences want to offer as input. After the discussion's complete, we'd regroup and ask each scribe from each table to report back to the rest of the audience on what they discovered from their own group. And in order that this whole process runs smoothly, I feel like we should have some ground rules set up by the committee members here, like maybe the committee chairs would announce how much time each resident is allowed to speak at these tables, and also to make sure that those that are not as outspoken as the others would still get a chance and be requested to talk specifically, so that everybody's voice is heard. And lastly, I feel like we're planners. We have a lot of technical background, so we can bring that to the table. So Patrick is with MetroCog, and Mary is with Economic Development, Karen is also. So we'd bring some facts to the table, like how much economic development has been happening in the town over the past decade, what portion of it was for arts and entertainment, and what portion of it is for other types of uses. How has the demand been, and why do we think a particular sectoral focus is more important for this kind of development? We'd also share the deed restrictions and the other limitations that we all have to work under for getting this project moved forward successfully.
Thanks, Asmitha. So one of the other things that we talked about was outreach. And before I left the meeting last time, I had one of the task force members mention a particular group, such as the high school population in the arts, and how would we connect with them. So when we were sitting down, we were thinking that, and of course, these are all ideas, and then we're going to open up the floor to all of you, but we just thought we'd kind of tell you what some of our ideas were. That we put together whatever the questionnaire is for the groups at the open houses, that we send it to the arts teachers at the high schools and have them work on it with the class, and have them, respond to the questionnaire, so that we could really get the input of our future generation of those that are in the arts, and also reach out to the council, the commissions and boards, the arts community, the Arts Commission. And then we also thought maybe we do some traveling open houses. We could do one at the Rotary. We could do one at the Chamber, and any other groups that all of you think should be part of it. Of course, the whole task force couldn't participate, but maybe each of you might have one particular group you really want to be part of that, and then we would make sure that happened. So these are just some of the ideas that we threw out there, and then I open up the floor to you and whoever else wants to talk.
So thank you. I don't know, Patrick, do you have any specific comments that you'd like to add?
Not at this time. I think Mary and Susmitha did a great job, basically stating the premise of the roundtables, and the idea that we want to engage the public as much as possible, and also in terms of the traveling outreach, look towards various boards and commissions and community organizations, arts groups, recreation groups, conservation groups, anything along those lines. I think is a sector of the public that we should be engaging. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks all of you. So those are just the initial ideas. And I'd just like to take a second to comment, this is a tough format to work in. So, we know there's an audience, it's a round dais, it's a hard thing. It might be easier to do in a smaller room, but we really felt that it's important that we share the whole deliberative process. So with that, I'd like to just ask everybody If you have any questions or comments, we're going to develop a conversation amongst ourselves about some of the specific things to do, regarding the initial ideas presented. So if anybody would like to be the first person to chime in, the question is, how do we go ahead and develop a public format program, based on some of the initial ideas here?
First, Mary, is the Rotary and the Arts high school teachers, that's in addition to the 2 or 3 around town in the strategic locations?
Yes, so, we would do as many open houses as we felt necessary, but in addition to, Rotary meets every Tuesday, so we plan to have a meeting on a Tuesday and, do one of our roundtables at the Rotary meeting. Same with the Chamber, they meet the 3rd Tuesday of every month, so we plan one of those and have it at one of their Chamber meetings. And any other groups that this task force feels we should travel to, we would make plans to do so.
So I was just thinking, since a lot of this was very discussion roundtable based, especially as the weather gets warmer, it could be cool to do some sort of pop-up mural type of experience where people can engage in a more tactile way that might speak to engaging more artists to come forward in town to contribute. Maybe there's one at the theater site that can be, a healing process as well, to be able to contribute something that way. I don't know if that means it's not a thought through idea I'm having, it's from when you were speaking. But maybe some of the prompts that we are sharing, or some of the ideas even that come out of those roundtables, there's a few of them popped out and people can comment or draw or paint, or, again, I don't have it thought through, but I think that could be interesting in addition to.
Thank you. So, rather than stop on every single idea, let's just keep moving, and as we collect a larger group of ideas, we'll continue to talk about them.
One of the things that I was struck by when I looked back through some of the old studies that had been done was just how many different ways they collected information, not just with roundtables or public forums, but also surveys and questionnaires and things like, I hadn't heard the idea of doing a mural prompt, but that seems kind of interesting. But it seems if we can, go to a broader group of people in a multiplicity of ways, it would give us a broader sense of people's sentiments.
Thank you.
Just going by what Amanda said, I'd like to, these are great for people to come out here with the weather that's cooler, but maybe once it does get warmer, we do have an actual meeting on the site. I think that would be good.
Just to agree, I think diversifying methodologies of collecting information is probably the most important aspect at this moment. So something that's online, something that's in hand or written based on folks who maybe are less extroverted, and then also an opportunity for folks to speak up in small group discussions who are more extroverted makes a lot of sense. So I do think an online platform is important, and I also think it's important to diversify when we're meeting, how we're meeting, things like that, just so that we're bringing a diverse group of people into the setting, a Saturday morning, a weekday evening, just thinking through when we're making opportunities available for people. And yes, I really think a teen component and hearing from our teen thespians in the town is really essential. I know personally, as a student who was at Bunnell High School 15 years ago, we were having conversations about what we wanted to see happen on the site, and I would love to see teen input.
Peter, you were looking?
Yes, I wanted to just pose the question of how the questions themselves are framed that drive the discussion within the community. Certainly people will have their own ideas that they're coming forward with, but we need to think through not only what is the structure that we're looking to put back there, which is the physical manifestation that could be drawn and so forth, but also what are the uses we want to see on the site, and drive some specificity there. And then there's also the level of what kind of oversight do we need to see? How is it programmed? And who's responsible for that oversight? Which, you know, is it the ACS study that was just distributed? CGS, thank you. Spent a lot of time with, and, you know, is informing us, and we certainly want the public to be, you know, informed with past work that's been done and past thinking that helps to inform the process moving forward.
I'll just add that we will let everyone know that is on the town website that anyone can view.
Terrific.
Thank you. Eddie?
Yeah, I guess total public participation would be the way to go. You know, I think we all have our ideas, or people that are in the arts, of how it could be done, or what could be done, and who's going to pay for it. But if you're going to get a big catch basin, I guess, is what you're saying, to see what people imagine, and what could be done. And I think that's probably, and then the debate or whatever is going to happen after that. But I guess to make it all inclusive, I guess people should be able to share their thoughts and jot them down and keep them, you know, in line of what we can and cannot do, or what, you know, is feasible. Basically what it boils down to. But a big a catch basin of ideas would be great.
Yeah, so my job is to kind of steer the conversation. So we want to start parsing what we're trying to accomplish. And so I'd like to acknowledge Peter's question about how these questions are developed, what are they framing. Our intention at this point is to make that a homework assignment, for all of us and the community. And so to develop that question list, to frame that roundtable discussion where we started, is going to be one of our tasks. We're going to decide those questions, and we're looking for input from the community about what should be asked. So that's one thing. So the content of what's going to be asked at the formal public meetings is going to be developed down the line. So I want to just separate that conversation for a moment so we can come to an agreement on the format of that. And without cutting anyone off, I'd like to, really grateful to say, I think we're very much aligned in our thinking, that there are different formats of public input that work better for different people. And we want to reach as many people in the town as possible. So a formal town component, which might be represented by this round table, a date, a time, a structured event, you know, where people come to meet in person and talk in an intimate environment, is maybe one component that works great for a lot of people. Scott, you mentioned an online component, and we're toying with ideas there, and Susmitha brings some great experience in that, using online tools that have actually been developed around municipal and community input. So there is a whole bunch of applications that have been developed and other communities have used successfully. And so tonight we'll probably hear more about those and how that can facilitate an online component of gathering public input. And then our third strategy, we're kind of summarizing now, the third strategy is what we would call like an outreach tour. And you know, we just know that getting people to town hall on a specific date at a specific time is very difficult for a lot of people, even with the best intentions. So the concept of this committee's membership reaching out to organizations that they might be a part of, and maybe not go on a presentation tour, but a listening tour. And maybe maybe we have to discuss it, structuring that listening tour around the same content questions that are done at the roundtables. So I see 3 strategies developing to reach different communities, and I think that's important. I wanted to make sure that we're starting to coalesce around that idea. Eddie?
Are we going to use the ACG report as a guide of any capacity because they did the survey.
Sure, I actually was a part of that committee
Yeah,
as
I remember
well.
that, yeah.
And you and I served on that, and SIB has distributed that. And when we talked about, previous studies, there is an archive on the town site. So it's up to us how we use that. But I thought a lot of good work came out of that, and it seems like some other people agree as well. So I think, all the information we can get to contribute to our understanding of what to be done is good. But how we formally do that, I think we just make it available and have it food for thought at this point. Let's see, so further discussion on the type of format or other communities that we specifically want to reach out to, Patty?
Just as another possibility for a format was the charrettes, for public participation, where we had the stations based on information and questions, and the public came. They were at the four corners of the town, and we recorded at each of our stations every idea and every statement that the public came and wanted us to record. And then at the end, they went around with dots, and they put dots on what they thought was the most important. This was for Center School, and I have to say personally, being part of that, I thought it was very successful, and it was very visual. So you saw where the majority of the public, where their opinions and ideas laid. So it was just an extra idea for just another participation from the public.
I think too, to piggyback on that, it helps with what you were saying of the quieter voice can contribute based on someone else's vision and say, yeah, I second that, versus having to have it themselves. So it can be a nice compliment there.
So Smitha, I know you've given this some thought. Do you want to comment back on that?
Yes, I like your idea of charrettes, but charrettes are more helpful if you're looking at multiple topics, and if you're asking people to give feedback on a map, on locations, and also in charrette, it's very open-ended, and you're like just leaving the floor to any kind of expectation from the audience. But when you're having a roundtable discussion and tailoring it to a more facilitated discussion, you're bringing them back to reality. These are the limitations that we have. We have a deed restriction. This is the budget. This is the staff resources. This is the time frame. And you're actually delving deep into the ideas. You're not just asking people to put the dots, but you're going deeper and finding the whys of what they want to see and how they want to see. And both have their positives and negatives, but I would lean more towards the roundtables for this kind of discussion, because we just don't want people to say, I want such a thing, but why do you want such a thing? Why is it so important to you? And what experience do you bring to the table that we can tap into? Maybe some of these people can be continued towards the implementation, like involved in the implementation. When you have a charrette, you have a crowd coming in, crowd going out, and it's just, giving ideas at multiple stations, and you take the ideas, but you can't relate it to a face, and you don't go more deeper than that. Plus, it's not a design experiment. If it's a design experiment only, then it probably makes sense, but it's a more social, economical, political experiment here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Quick question. Susmita, when you envision a round table, how large is the round table? So for example, if we had 50 people, 50 attendees at a certain, meeting, would the round table consist of those 50 people, or would we make smaller group settings and allow for more deeper conversation in those smaller group settings?
Yes, ideally 10 to 12 people, including the committee members and the staff at each table, like 2 committee members and 1 staff maybe. And ideally, I would foresee like 5 round tables if we have 50 or 60 people. But there may be locations, typically what happens is the first meeting is very well attended, but once you come to the second or third meeting, that kind of diffuses the participation rate. In those cases, we can have, depending on how many people attend, if we have only a handful of people attending, like 12 residents or 15 residents, it doesn't make sense for us to outnumber the residents. So we should have to decide who will sit as part of the roundtable and who will sit back and observe the conversation, so that we're not dominating the conversation here.
I would just like to say I love the idea of small group dialogue and roundtables. I think it makes a lot of sense. I envision, starting a meeting with kind of an overview and explanation of the circumstances that we're in now, breaking out into roundtable sessions depending on how many people are there, and then coming back together to see where the overlap is. I think that could be very beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to clarify just what Susmitha has already suggested, and works perfect, Scott, is the idea is if we have a large crowd, there'll be lots of small conversations. There'll be a person responsible, one of us, really, the committee members or a town staff, to kind of record a summary of what happened at that table and then bring all those summaries back together so there is a large conversation at the end of the meeting, right, Susmitha? Yes. So there is a roll-up process, but the idea is that we can have a smaller, quieter, more intimate conversation about the topics. The committee members and the public would contribute to the questions and the topics that we try and get through in that period. And then at the end, if there's a large group, it rolls back up. So that whole process, I think, has been thought out, and I very much like it. I continue, Amanda, I want to bring it back to your point. I know from my previous experience, and Patty, we worked together at the center school, there are people that are just uncomfortable speaking in public, and it's should not be a penalty, and it should be not a requirement that they overcome that. And so having in that roll-up process, Susmitha, as that conversation coalesces a little bit, maybe there is a component that we can add for people to second the ideas that come up from those combinations. So maybe we can do a little bit of both here in that final process.
I will say, as a teaching artist too, if you come with multiple people, you all have to split up.
Susmitha, just as a clarification, if you go to 3, 4 tables, whatever, they will be discussing the same thing at each table or a different topic at each table?
Same thing. So everybody's discussing the same questions from the list. One of the committee members is facilitating the discussion, making sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. Nobody's speaking twice or thrice on the same thing, unless you really have time to making sure the time, if you have 10 questions and 3 minutes for each question, 30 minutes of discussion, that's a lot of discussion. And then you regroup, you take a break, you regroup, then you hear from other groups. I also think that way you get to know your residents. Part of this is also a community building exercise. You're actually helping them interact with their fellow residents, know what each other's strengths are. If there's an artist in the group, that's even more nicer. Yeah.
That's why I appreciate your clarity on the charrette versus the discussion, because after hearing her say that, I think that the box of which this needs to live in from a real perspective, there's like a demystifying there, I think, if we're targeting the questions that way versus, let's put a Ferris wheel there, whatever I was at one of the center schools. I don't know that Ferris wheel was a real idea, but you know what I'm saying? That it gives it a container, which is nice.
I want to just reinforce that idea too. I think we're at the very beginning stage of community dialogue, and this is really about participation and idea generation. I think it's a ways down the road before we start to really think about structures and charrettes, or at least designing anything. So I think we want it, sort of the sky to be open right now in terms of ideas before we start to sort of narrow down to very hard specifics. And I like the direction this discussion's going in.
Yes.
So this is just a question of clarity. When you were talking earlier about the sessions that would be more workshop in nature, are these those sessions or are those different sessions?
These are workshops. The roundtables are generally considered as workshops for residents. Mhm.
I was just going to add, I wonder if we need help understanding the teen aspect outside of the teens in the arts classes. And I'm not hip enough to understand what that is. You know, I know they're not checking their email, so that it has to be, right? Will it even be a survey, to your point? Can we do it on Instagram? Is there a way? So I just put that out because that'll be an interesting challenge to actually get them.
Susmitha, could you, we had discussed some online
Yes.
outreach components. Could you get a little bit detail on that, please?
Sure. There are a couple of options for crowdsourcing online, like MindMixer and MetroQuest. If you get a chance in the next few days, please Google them up. And then they're good for encouraging crowd participation, like a public meeting or a public discussion. Everything comes with price, and it can remain open for as long as we want. Some responses could be tailored to the map, so we know from which part of the town we are getting the responses. Some communities also put out question of the week or question of the day, and ask people to, vote on, and one resident can like another resident's response and, back it up, just like Facebook does. So we just, discussed very preliminarily today, but we have to dig into the details and see what is it that everyone would be comfortable with. And Mary, if you want to add anything on that.
So we're very concerned about, on a survey basis, you could get inaccurate answers. We feel that it's important that whoever we're hearing from, that they state where they live, because just like they do if they have to do a public, if they're speaking here, that they're residents of Stratford, that one person isn't sending multiple. We want accuracy, and we feel that people, if they should be able to state their opinions and tell us who they are. So that would fall within that category.
So that's an important component about designing this, and something that might take some more legwork on our part to come together on what would be accurate. I think the intention here is to provide an avenue for anybody in their particular circumstance so they can participate in the process. So an online component, how does it work? How is it used? How does it roll up? And, we're not social scientists or anything, but we do want, to understand what we're reading and how it comes out. So I think that's an important part, but I think it's critical that, it's a new part of the world, and we have to be there for it.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people don't want to participate in a public speaking engagement. However, there's a very high, especially in the theater world, that they would love to engage publicly. So maybe this could also you could have a public forum, speaking forum. I mean, people are very good at articulating their ideas. It's not going to be all on paper or all read. I think we really have to, also set aside a portion of it so people can, speak.
And so what kind of format, what, do you have a specific suggestion around it? Because I think I'm kind of imagining that is going to be accomplished at the roundtables. And I just don't know what format. We would just have a night where everybody comes in and gets a period of time, just like a public comment period, or?
Well, not everyone is going to hear that person's idea at that roundtable. That, or maybe we're going to be jotting it down or whatever. Maybe because I've been through this so much, and people public speak about it, and they could, and some of them, I'm not saying I do, but they give, they could give a better idea public speaking, than it would be. And I think that there should be time offered, for this, to do that as well, especially in this, specifically what we're talking about.
And so that might be an opportunity where we have a bolt-on section of public comment, like at the beginning or end of the roundtables or something like that? Okay. So we have to take that all under consideration and see how that works. But, I think, I think part of our job as the committee is to facilitate communication in pretty much any form anybody's comfortable, but also to wrap some structure around it. I mean, the structure of what we're going to be doing is trying to coalesce. We just need to coalesce what the community as a whole believes should happen. And, it's likely we're going to find competing ideas that we're with the best intention. And I think it's just facilitate, let those ideas come up and let them be documented from, any angle that they come around from. Susmitha?
Also, to add, every roundtable should have some diversity in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of background, in terms of opinions. That's when it becomes very successful. If you have a group of same-age people advocating for the same thing at one table, then it defeats the purpose of interaction. You would want to know why another person in your group wants something else, and what is his or her idea for that? What is their reasoning behind that? And that's when, I think that's the beauty of true participation in the roundtables.
Okay, and then we've kind of talked about the roundtable format, where the content will come from. We've adjusted it just a little bit, and the online part is something that we're looking for input from the committee. What that could be, what should we do with it? I'm not too old to not have been social media, but I just haven't participated in it at all, so I'm a little behind the 8 ball on what the right thing to do is in the online piece. But Susmitha's got some experience on that, so we're going to be exploring that in the meantime. The piece that we haven't talked any further about is just about this outreach tour. So I'd like to just focus the conversation on the outreach tour. And does everybody have a group or a community that, importantly we should be reaching out to and get a list and talk about that idea? Is everybody comfortable with that strategy? Has anybody got examples of communities we could reach out to?
When you're talking about communities, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to summarize where we're at right now so we don't go into different directions. Basically, we've got 3 things. We got a round table, and we've discussed what the round table is. We have a listening tour where we're going to go to various organizations, which we could decide later. And we have an outreach program with the 2 programs that Susmitha has. So those are the 3 things that we have.
We also have suggested a pop-up event that Amanda had suggested. That was also one of the options.
Okay.
Or just that your pop-up is maybe a cliche right now. Maybe I shouldn't have used that word, but the ability to contribute without speaking. So some sort of visual or artistic medium to do it, a farmer's market or...
So that'll be the 4th item. Al?
Do we have a timetable of any type of, how long it's going to take to do this?
That's our next item agenda. That's why I want to get this item agenda. If we all agree on this process, and if we want to go forward with this process, because once we give this process to the staff, then they have to set up meetings, and then we'll have to go to the next step, which is content. What other questions? Where will the questions come? Where will we hold these meetings? So I want to try to do this in an organized manner so that we're not speaking about something we should be speaking 2 meetings from now.
Question, Mr. Chairman. When you said outreach, is that the online component? Okay.
Online outreach, yes. So you want me to review the 4 items as they stand?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I think, and it has to be, before we get going here, this body is not going to be in a position to answer any questions. We're just receiving ideas, right? We don't have to come back and answer any specific question about theater, about not-for-profit, about seating, about what we're going to do. I think that's pretty important that we don't have to answer to any specific questions in this phase. We're just receiving ideas. That's it.
Right now, we're we're doing the process.
Right.
Right, we're not asking any questions. We may never ask questions.
Yeah, right.
But just the process. Do we want to go ahead with these 4 items? Or do you have more items, or would you like more discussion?
My thought is the roundtables and the listening tour, I believe, are the same thing. Does that make sense? So, the roundtables we are listening and we are facilitating. I think our role is ultimately to be facilitating the conversation and, yes, hearing, not having answers, having the facts of what the deed says and being able to provide that type of information. But ultimately, as this listening tour or roundtables are occurring, we are facilitating dialogue and kind of helping, hold 2 opposing ideas in one room, around one table, and just hearing all ideas that are on the table. Correct? Does that make sense? Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
It's just me that would you say that the listening tour would just be a different kind of a roundtable than the other ones you're proposing?
Yes, and the reason why we don't want to answer questions is because somebody may give an answer that may be misleading than somebody else, and you don't want to fall into that. To be consistent, even if you know the answer, I would say this is more about us being quiet and listening to what people have to say. If they have questions, write it down, bring it back to the organizational meeting, and then address the questions that are answered, like as a group, with consistent responses. And for the listening tour, we would want to do the listening tour because those are their meetings at their times, and they have organized them, and they have a different group. So those people who did not normally get a chance to come to evening meetings or who did not get a chance to participate will have an extra platform to participate in this kind of discussion.
But I'll just add, it'll be framed around the same questions. I think that's what Scott was referring to. So we're getting the same, we can compare.
Yeah, and just to continue to clarify, the structure of the conversation would be set by the questions that we create, and those questions would be worked through at the roundtables, and we can decide to bring those same questions out to the groups. Because they're not likely to have an articulated position, but they might have a meeting with 100 people in it. And we can say, hey, look, we're going to go through this just like we were at a round table. So that's a decision we're making, and we can decide, whatever you feel good with.
Unless there's any other discussion?
I have a question. What is the final output of this? Are we getting a report? Where does it go? What is the output?
You want to answer or me? So this is what we were thinking. We'd listen to everyone as much as we can, engage different types of audiences, come back, and then summarize all the ideas that are heard at these workshops and online engagement, listening tours, pop-up events. And then probably, come up with something called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what do people perceive as the strengths for this site? What are the weaknesses right now? What's the opportunity that this presents for the town and the residents? And what is the perceived threat? If we don't do anything, or if we do something that, would take a long time, what's the perceived threat? So after these are categorized as SWOT, then it's about the next step, coming to maybe 3 preferred options. These could be design-based, And that, when we get to that point, we have to discuss how we'd engage a design professional to do this kind of work. And basically, in the end, it's a developer's, a developer's call to pick one of the options or a combination of options, depending on their financing, their timeline, their limited resources. But we would make sure that all of the ideas are categorized into the 3 options, so that we are not just putting out one final alternative that could be defeated by a market condition or a developer's constraints, but something that's more realistic, having 3 options, and all 3 could be good options.
We would love to have 3 options, or a few options to go, and then it would go through the RDA, and then move forward from there.
Any other discussion?
So what you're saying is you're going to have many options, we hope. And then after this, it's going to be into the hands of the RDA?
Well, it would go through the redevelopment agency, and we're hoping that we could have some kind of a design to show a vision to the public of what the 3 were, and we would actually have a public meeting so that the public could see them, we would present them, and then they could give us feedback at that meeting before we went any further.
Okay, so it's going to be, so
Really, a lot of public feedback.
Right.
And just so you guys know, that's when the design charrette process really kicks in, is when there's all the feedback is consolidated, we take into everyone's input, ideas are thrown out there, this task force comes up with the idea of these are the 3 best options for the site. That's when the design process can begin, and that's when you can go back out to the public and say, what do you like in terms of these 3 options that are most realistic based on, once again, the deed restrictions are going to have a lot to do with what can be done at the site. And those are things that are going to be, fleshed out during the roundtable discussion is, here are the limitations and bring us your ideas now. So.
Right. Okay. No further comment.
We're sort of thinking through the process now and sort of where it leads us once we have a plethora of ideas, summarize it, reduce it to a few options. What's your thought on how the design process is done? People fall in love with pictures.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be sensitive to who is doing the design, how that firm or individuals were selected, and are they sort of the best source for those ideas? Was their experience in designing structures for particular uses? Have we thought about how that process might look?
I think we should be fair to, the professionals, and definitely the best professionals should be picked based on their experience and not just because, somebody's being favored because of somebody knows somebody. And that thing, we can come back to it. We don't have to decide right now. But again, coming back to how this all gets reported, after our workshops and listening sessions and everything, we close the public process for the initial input. Then we come back again, regroup here as an organizational meeting. We can do something like have boards set up here for the design options so people can come a little early, or we can have the meeting open at 6:30 to 7. Everybody's welcome to go around the boards, look at the design options. And then 7 o'clock we can start our meeting and probably, do something like the first meeting where you would have the staff report to you on what the options are, so everybody can observe and understand what they are, and then close it, and then invite public comment. Yes.
So, so I'd like to make sure we are clear on where this subcommittee starts and stops. And so, that's an important consideration. for these full process, and I want to be transparent, going forward. My understanding as co-chair with Tony is that this subcommittee's responsibility is to elicit the town's opinion. What do you like? What do you think we should get behind? What are the several ideas? How can they share that space? But my understanding is that this committee is going to give those ideas to the RDA, and then my understanding is that this is the end of this subcommittee, and then the RDA takes it and says, hey, look, the town likes these ideas, and then starts a new public process to go through and start to make real, any one of those options. Is that correct, just from your perspective? And I put that out.
Yes, but I love the idea of the meeting where we all come together as a task force and present the vision that came out of all the feedback, and then have the whole task force listen to what the feedback from the community. I think that's a great way to.
I agree in the idea. Is a multi-month design process involved, or is that in the next stage of things?
Might take.
I don't know how long that takes to get actual pictures and drawings done.
Could reconvene.
I don't want to be the spoiled sport, but I will. Right now, we need to decide on the process. So can I have a motion? Would someone make a motion I'll list the process, the round tables, the listening round tables, the online outreach component, and the pop-up event. Let's get that resolved, and then the questions and everything else are really a different matter for a different time. Or if we have time tonight, we can continue. We have the room till about 10 of 7, so we'll do as much as we can. Patty, you made the motion?
Second.
Sip, second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. The next item is finalizing the next meeting details.
So we were looking at the calendar, and the co-chairs are available on that week of March 25th. March 26th, the chamber is available the whole evening. So we have been asked by many to make the meetings a little bit later. So if you're available on March 26th, then you can determine what time, but it shouldn't be 5:30, because I know it's hard for some of you to get here and for some of the public to get here as well. So I don't know if you want to check your calendars tonight or get back to me, and then also decide on the timing. Do you want 6 o'clock, 6:30? Just let us know your preference. Well, what we could suggest to everyone, we did email SIB. SIB was kind enough to point out the 2011 task force or the that report, and I emailed it to everyone. So I think everyone should really take a look at it as homework to maybe help them decide on where we want to go when we're looking at some structured questions, because why reinvent the wheel? We can, but we might as well look at past groups that have put a lot of time and effort in, and just have something to base off of and then work from there, if everyone agrees with that.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that. Like, the next meeting is also going to be organizational. It's going to be a working meeting amongst the committee members. We're going to need to put a finer point on what we've agreed to tonight in terms of these 4 formats. And each one's going to need a little bit more. I mean, obviously, we need to work out a lot more details. We're going to be getting a lot of help from the staff. But also, that meeting will be primarily focused on that roundtable question list. So that, would be a big ask for everybody to come back with how should we structure this roundtable conversation? What are the important questions? And, when the devil's in the details, it's a big conversation to have. So we're going to need to work on that individually, and I would encourage the public also to comment in any way, format you like on what should be covered. We're going to be listening to that as well. And that's the big homework assignment. If there is examples of like the kind of the artistic nonverbal event, maybe we can get together and get a finer point on what we can do there. And I think that's really our homework for the month.
Now, is the staff going to be working on questions for the roundtable for the next month or next meeting?
Sure. Actually, we would go through the report that Cibla sent and summarize all the questions from that report and probably float those around as emails so everybody can take a look at the list of questions and kind of do their own thinking on, do I really want this in the current context or not, and come back with more preparation than, sitting here and discussing why we want what we want.
One of the things that we didn't talk further about was when we're doing outreach to some of the community groups. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so if you want to email me, if you think of a group, for example, Scott, not to put you on but you were talking about, outreach to the youth. If you come up with something that you think we can go to them, let me know. If there's another group that you feel should be included, please just email me and let me know, and I can relay the list at the next meeting. And then you can let me know if you think it's an appropriate list.
Are there any other questions from any of the committee members about where we go from here, what we do about the next meeting? So, there's like a 90-minute period, and then we're going to have a couple weeks off. Any other questions that you have about it? Anything else you want to comment before we go?
Just to confirm, we're looking at March 26th? March 26th. Okay.
Is it possible to do prior to that week?
Well, one of our chairs won't be here, but we can talk off. We can figure out what might work best for everyone.
Mary, I think we should do a doodle poll and with a couple of dates and see who can, how we can.
Yeah, we can do that.
Date for everyone.
Might be easiest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for myself, it'd be helpful to know all of them, or a chunk of meetings in advance, if it's possible, of ours. I recognize the public part, but.
Well, we may end the next meeting being ready to do our first outreach or roundtable.
I'm just wondering if March 26th works. Do we need a doodle for that? Or can do?
I'll send an email out tomorrow.
Any other discussions?
Tom and Tony, I want to thank you for your comments about what the responsibility of the committee is, and trying to limit that focus to what we know it is today. We could be asked to do more down the road, but I think putting those limits on it now helps me in terms of understanding what our role in this whole process is going to be. I think there's a lot of steps to the process, and this is the first step, and it's really important here to encourage as much input from as many organizations and constituencies as possible. And then there's still, I think, a number of steps to go through before we ultimately know sort of what the final options might be.
I failed to mention, but there's a sign-up sheet at the table there. If you haven't already given us your email, please sign up and put your email there, and you'll get all the information from the committee.
I wonder if before the next meeting, it might be appropriate to have a public comment section so people can just speak directly to us.
If we can have it on the 26th, we'll have plenty of time. So yes, you know, we would encourage that if, right. But if the 26th, we'll have the room the whole evening, so we can have time.
Pardon me, just one, and again, Peter, you made a good comment about, you know, kind of capping our work here. We want to hear the input. I'm not so sure, again, it's very tempting. I'm seeing tonight we're kind of leaning in to some things here that I think might be a little premature, but as far as SIB, you go, you know, do we really want to answer questions about things? Because people have expectations, and they have an idea about things. And, you know, I don't know if we want to, we're not at the point, I don't think, to answer questions about them. I think we want their ideas. We don't, you know,
Exactly. Encourage them to come to the to the round tables.
You know, I don't think we should be, well, answering the question. I think that's the idea of what we're doing here. We're getting your input.
Yeah, Eddie, I want to totally reaffirm that. I mean, that is what I signed up for. You know, we are here to gather public input. You know, the public's input is most important. We all have experience and ideas, but this committee is set up to accept input from the public, this community, about what to do next, and that's what we're here to do.
I want to thank the staff. They put a lot of work into this. And if I see no other comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? No. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out, everyone. Thank you.